The wind howled across the frozen plains like a wounded spirit, tearing at the earth, at the sky, at the two lonely figures struggling against it. Snow rode the air in wild spirals, stinging skin and blinding eyes. The mountains stood like silent judges in the distance, their white crowns glowing beneath a fading sun. It was the kind of winter that swallowed whole caravans and left no trace but bones beneath the drifts. On that endless stretch of wilderness, death did not come with noise. It came with cold. We are going to freeze to death. Our only salvation is to make love and share my warmth, said the Apache, his deep voice steady despite the storm raging around them. His name was Thunderhawk, a warrior born of the high mesas and red canyons, raised on stories of honor, survival, and the sacred bond between man and woman. His broad shoulders were dusted in snow, his dark hair tied back with a strip of leather, his eyes sharp as flint. The storm did not frighten him, but the sight of the woman trembling beside him did. She was called Winter Rose, a name given for the strange strength she carried beneath her quiet beauty. Her father had been a trader who crossed the frontier between the growing American settlements and the Apache lands. Her mother had taught her to pray softly at dawn and to listen to the wind for warning. Now the wind screamed only of danger. They had not planned to be alone together in the wild heart of the frontier. Fate had thrown them onto the same narrow trail days earlier when a supply wagon overturned near the ridge. The blizzard had come without mercy. The others had scattered, chasing shelter wherever they could find it. Thunderhawk had found Winter Rose struggling to pull herself free from the broken wood and frightened horses. He had lifted her as if she weighed nothing and led her away from chaos into the rising storm. The Old West was not kind to strangers, and even less kind to trust. Apache warrior and a frontier woman walking side by side would have stirred whispers in any town, but the wilderness erased such divisions. Out here there was no lawman, no tribal elder, no church bell calling judgment. There was only survival. For 2 days they had pushed through the snowbound land, searching for a cave or abandoned trapper's cabin. Thunderhawk knew the terrain better than most, yet even he had never seen the plains so buried. Rivers lay hidden under glassy sheets of ice. Familiar trails vanished beneath drifts that rose higher than a horse's chest. Winter Rose followed him with quiet determination, her boots soaked, her breath shallow but stubborn. By the time the sun began to fall on the 3rd day, the cold had turned cruel. It slipped through layers of cloth and fur, biting skin until it burned. Winter Rose stumbled once, then again. Thunderhawk caught her before she could fall face first into the snow. Her lips were pale, her lashes glittered with frost. "I cannot feel my hands," she whispered, her voice fragile as cracked porcelain. He led her to a rocky outcrop that offered little shelter, but at least broke the wind's sharpest edge. Working quickly, he cleared the snow with his gloved hands and laid down pine branches from a nearby cluster of trees. His movements were practiced, calm. Inside, though, a storm greater than the one above churned through him. He had seen what winter did to the weak and the unlucky. Winter Rose tried to help, but her fingers would not obey. Thunderhawk knelt before her and took her hands between his own. His palms were warmer, stronger. He rubbed life back into her skin, watching for any sign that the cold had dug too deep. The frontier stories often spoke of bravery in gunfights and glory in battle. They did not speak as often of this quieter courage, the kind that demanded closeness instead of violence. Thunderhawk knew the old ways. He knew that when the body loses heat, another body can give it back. It was not shameful. It was not reckless. It was survival bound with trust. The snow thickened around them, building walls of white. The sky darkened to iron. The world shrank to the small hollow beneath the rock and the steady rhythm of their breathing. Winter Rose looked up at him, fear shining in her eyes, but also something else, a question, a choice. "Will we see morning?" she asked. Thunderhawk did not lie. "Only if we fight for it." He removed his heavy outer coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling her close. The heat between them began as a faint promise. He could feel her shivering against his chest, the fragile flutter of her heartbeat. He lowered his forehead to hers, sharing breath, sharing strength. His voice softened. "We're going to freeze to death. Our only salvation is to make love and share my warmth." The words were not spoken with hunger, but with urgency and care. They carried the weight of ancient knowledge of winters survived by those who understood that life clings to life. Winter rose, searched his face for any sign of dishonor, and found none. In his gaze there was respect, fierce and unwavering. She nodded slowly. The wind roared approval or warning. It was impossible to tell. Thunderhawk adjusted their blankets and furs, creating a cocoon against the storm. He held her tightly, careful and protective, letting their shared warmth grow. The closeness erased the biting edge of the air. Slowly, her trembling eased. Her breathing steadied against his chest. In that fragile shelter, something deeper than survival stirred. It was not the wild passion sung about in saloons or whispered behind barn doors. It was quieter, stronger. Two souls facing death together, choosing connection instead of surrender.
Oh.
The cold pressed in from every side, yet between them there was heat, trust, and a strange tenderness born of danger. Winter Rose rested her head against him, listening to the steady drum of his heart. She realized that she no longer felt alone in this vast American wilderness. Thunderhawk felt her relax and knew that hope, small but stubborn, still lived. Outside, the storm showed no mercy. Snow buried the entrance to their shelter inch by inch. The mountains vanished completely behind a white curtain. Night crept over the plains, deep and endless. Thunderhawk closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in surrender, but in prayer to the spirits of his ancestors. He asked for strength. He asked for dawn. Winter Rose tightened her hold on him as a violent gust shook the rock above them. The sound was like a gunshot cracking through the dark. The earth trembled faintly beneath their bodies. Thunderhawk's eyes snapped open. The mountain ridge above them groaned, heavy with fresh snow. Another thunderous crack split the night, and then the ground began to move. The snow shifted violently above them, and Thunderhawk's grip tightened instinctively. Winter Rose pressed closer, her warmth now a fragile anchor against the storm. Each creak of the rocks above sounded like the world's judgment, each crack like a sentence handed down by the frozen sky. Thunderhawk could feel the snow loosening, the weight of it pressing down like an invisible hand. He knew the mountains could bury them in seconds if they were careless, yet he could not leave her side. Not now, not ever. He shifted slightly, keeping his body between her and the shifting rock, feeling the power of the storm batter against their small refuge. Winter Rose's hands, once trembling violently, now rested against his chest, seeking the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He looked down at her face, the soft curve of her cheeks flushed from cold and fear. She had survived much in her life already, the raids along the frontier, the loss of her family to sickness and settlers' greed, but this raw wilderness tested even the strongest soul. Thunderhawk had always been one to read the land, to listen to the whispers in the wind that others ignored. He remembered his father speaking of the plains as if they were living, breathing creatures. The land watches, the wind tells. The snow hides more than you see, he had said, his voice deep and calm. Thunderhawk had carried those words into adulthood, and they now guided him through this storm. He had seen snowstorms before, yes, but never one this merciless, one that seemed determined to erase every footprint, every sign of life. Winter Rose, sensing his thoughts, whispered softly, "Tell me about the mountains. Tell me why you are not afraid." Her voice was almost swallowed by the wind, yet it carried a weight that made Thunderhawk pause. Her curiosity was brave, unbroken by the danger surrounding them. He traced a finger along the line of her jaw, careful not to disturb the fragile warmth they shared, and spoke in the low, resonant tone he reserved for moments when words mattered more than action. "These mountains have seen more than men can count. They have swallowed armies, hidden fugitives, and protected the lost. My people know them well, but even we respect their power. Every ridge has a story, every hollow a secret. You must understand this land does not forgive weakness." His eyes flicked to the ridge above, to the heavy snow, to the shadows that shifted like restless spirits. "We are in the heart of something older than settlements, older than the stories you hear in towns. If we survive this, it will not be because the land is kind." Winter Rose's eyes widened with awe and fear. Her hands pressed harder to his chest. "Older than towns? Older than stories? What do you mean?" Thunderhawk's gaze softened for a moment. He knew she had grown up with tales of settlers and traders, of guns and lawmen, of the frontier tamed and mapped. He wanted to tell her about the deep past, the age when his people roamed freely, when the wind carried songs instead of whispers of danger. But he could not linger too long. The storm was relentless, each second a test of endurance. There are places, he said quietly, where the earth still remembers the old ways, where spirits of the mountains watch, not for revenge, but for balance. This ridge tonight it is awake with that power. We must move carefully. One false step, and the snow will claim more than our warmth. Winter Rose shivered despite the furs. She had faced hardship before, but the raw immediacy of this winter felt different. It was not just cold, it was alive. Each flake seemed purposeful, each gust deliberate. She realized that survival depended on trust, not just in Thunderhawk, but in the land itself. And though her heart raced with fear, she could not help but feel a stirring of something deeper, connection to him, to the wilderness, to the stories hidden beneath the frozen crust of the plains. Thunderhawk shifted again, scanning the landscape through a narrow opening in their rocky shelter. The storm had painted the world white, hiding every landmark. He thought of the days before the blizzard when the sun had warmed their skin, when the trail had seemed navigable, when Winter Rose had smiled at him in a way that made his heart tighten. Those moments now felt distant, almost unreal, yet they were what kept him anchored. He could not let the snow erase them, erase her. As night deepened, the wind's roar seemed to settle into a strange rhythm, like the slow beating of a drum. Thunderhawk's thoughts turned inward. He thought of the Apache elders, of the lessons of resilience and connection, of love not as a fleeting pleasure, but as a tool of survival. He realized that his own feelings for Winter Rose had grown quietly, without words, without confession. This storm, merciless as it was, had forced those feelings into clarity. Protecting her warmth, sharing his own, was not only survival, it was the first step toward something more profound, something that even the cold could not kill. Winter Rose, meanwhile, let her mind wander back to the days before the storm. She remembered the laughter of the men in the wagon, the echo of Thunderhawk's voice giving orders calmly, the sharp edge of his eyes watching every move. She remembered the strength in his arms when he had lifted her, the way his body seemed to act as a shield against everything. And she remembered the small moments, like when he had brushed snow from her hair, that had stirred something she could not yet name, now pressed against him for warmth. Those memories came alive in a new way, intense, urgent, and terrifying. Thunderhawk finally broke the silence. "There is more at stake than just the storm," he said, his voice low.
Ow.
"The paths we follow have shadows. There are men who would see the land tamed, its secrets stolen, its people broken. It will come for those who survive this blizzard. Tonight we survive together. Tomorrow we may have to fight not just the cold, but everything the world has forgotten to fear." Winter Rose's eyes narrowed, a spark of determination rising through her fear. "Then we will survive together. Whatever comes, I trust you." Thunderhawk nodded, feeling the weight of her trust like a mantle across his shoulders. He could feel her warmth against him, and in that warmth, the cold seemed almost bearable. Almost. But the mountain was still alive, the storm still hungry, and the snow above them shifted again with a sinister creak. Suddenly, a distant rumble echoed through the ridge, low and ominous. Thunderhawk froze, listening. It was not thunder, not ice cracking, not the wind. It was something heavier, deliberate. His hand tightened around Winter Rose's. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she did not pull away. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the white horizon. "We are not alone," he said. "And whatever it is, it waits." Winter Rose's pulse quickened. The closeness that had brought comfort now seemed fragile, as if the storm outside and the threat beyond could undo it at any moment. Thunderhawk pressed his forehead to hers, feeling her shiver despite the heat they shared. "We will face it together," he promised, though even he could not know what lay ahead. The wind gusted, the mountain groaned, and the shadows of the night pressed in closer. Survival demanded more than warmth and courage, demanded instinct, trust, and a willingness to confront the unknown. And as Thunderhawk and Winter Rose huddled together, hearts beating in sync, they understood that the night had only just begun, and that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm of secrets and danger that waited beyond the ridge. The snow shifted again above them, a warning whispered through the icy air. And the two of them knew the truth. The fight for life and for each other had only just begun. Thunderhawk kept his eyes fixed on the ridge above them, every muscle coiled like a bowstring ready to snap. The distant rumble had grown louder, more deliberate, and with it came the faint crunch of snow beneath heavy steps. The storm had masked the sound at first, but now it was unmistakable. Someone or something was moving toward them, careful but relentless. Winter Rose shivered against him, her fingers clutching the fur lining of his coat. She could feel his tension, the way he barely breathed, waiting for the moment when the world outside might strike. "We are being watched," Thunderhawk muttered, his voice low, almost a growl. "Not by the storm, not by the snow, by men, or perhaps worse." His dark eyes scanned the horizon through the narrowing visibility. He could sense the presence of others, feel their intent in the crisp air. The frontier had its dangers, but he had never encountered such patience in pursuit before. Whoever they were hunters, not wanderers. Winter Rose pressed closer, feeling the raw power radiating from him. Her pulse had been steady when they had huddled for warmth, but now it raced with fear. "Why would they follow us?" she whispered. "We were just trying to survive the storm." Thunderhawk did not answer immediately. He remembered the traders who had passed through the plains a fortnight ago, men with wide-brimmed hats and eyes too sharp for honest work. They had mentioned strange movements near the mountains, rumors of hidden gold, old Apache relics and paths untouched by settlers. Thunderhawk had dismissed them as boastful tales until he saw their tracks leading toward this very ridge. He knew now it was no coincidence. Greed and ignorance had found them. "They seek something," he finally said, brushing snow from her hair and tucking it behind her ear. His touch was gentle, careful not to alarm her further. "And they will stop at nothing to find it." Winter Rose's lips parted in a soft gasp. The thought of strangers stalking them through the blizzard made the cold seem sharper. She had faced danger before, but nothing like this. Here the storm was not just a backdrop, it was a weapon in the hands of forces they could not see. Her mind flashed back to stories her mother had told, of spirits guarding sacred lands, of punishments that fell upon those who trespassed. She wondered if the mountain itself would rise to protect them more, if the hunters would succeed where the land had failed. Thunderhawk adjusted the small shelter, piling more pine branches to reinforce their hiding place. Each sound outside made him flinch. Every echo carried a new threat. "We must be ready," he said. "If they find us in the open, we will not last." His hands brushed over hers, drawing her attention to the warmth they shared. "But together we have a chance." Winter Rose nodded, finding courage in his presence. She had grown strong in her life, but strength without guidance could falter. With Thunderhawk, she felt part of something larger. His courage, his knowledge of the land, his instinct for survival. She wrapped her arms around him, not just for warmth, but for reassurance. They were a unit now, bound by circumstance, by fear, and by something neither fully understood yet. The snow above them shifted again, louder this time, like the crack of a falling tree. Thunderhawk froze. "It moves faster than snow should," he whispered. "It is not natural." He glanced at Winter Rose, his expression hard. "We may face more than men tonight." Winter Rose's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand explanations, but she trusted him. In the silence between the storm and the rumble, she could feel the weight of every decision they had made, every step that had brought them here. She realized how fragile life was, how quickly warmth and hope could vanish beneath the snow, when yet in that fragility there was a strange beauty, a clarity she had never known. Thunderhawk spoke again, recounting stories from his youth, from his tribe. He spoke of the nights spent tracking buffalo, of the lessons learned from rivers and winds, of the codes that guided their people through both survival and honor. Winter Rose listened, absorbing every word, feeling the depth of history wrapped around them like the furs that barely kept out the cold. She understood now that this was more than a storm. This was a trial, a test of endurance, a challenge that would push them both to their limits. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The storm seemed endless, and the noises from the ridge grew and faded, as if the hunters or whatever lurked above were circling, testing, waiting. Thunderhawk and Winter Rose shared whispers, confessions, small stories of the past, and fears of the present. In their closeness, they built a fragile bond. Each heartbeat a defiance against the cold, and the threat looming beyond their shelter. Thunderhawk's mind wandered to the lands they had left behind. He thought of the mesas, the canyons, and the rivers. Of nights under open skies, where stars told stories older than any settlement. He remembered the old medicine man who had warned him that some lands hold memory, and that those who enter must respect it or pay a price. He had always believed it to be metaphor, a lesson in patience and humility. But now, with snow pressing against rock and unknown hunters stalking them through the blizzard, he understood that the land itself could be both protector and judge. Winter Rose, meanwhile, reflected on her own past. She had learned early that beauty and danger often live side by side, that survival required quick thinking and courage. Yet nothing had prepared her for the raw intensity of Thunderhawk, for the mixture of tenderness and power he exuded. Her body had found warmth in him, but her mind had found a kind of certainty she had never known. She knew that whatever came next, she would follow him, trust him, even when fear threatened to pull her into despair. A sudden shadow passed over the shelter, and Thunderhawk's senses snapped to full alert. He pulled Winter Rose close, keeping her low against the snow and pine branches. Outside, the storm seemed to hold its breath. The crunch of deliberate footsteps grew closer, sharper, more focused. Someone or something was navigating the blizzard with intent. Thunderhawk whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Hold still, do not make a sound. They are close, but we are ready." Winter Rose felt her body tighten, every nerve alive with fear and anticipation. She had never felt so vulnerable, yet so alive. In that tension she realized the depth of her feelings for Thunderhawk, a bond forged in adversity and survival. She would follow him through anything, but she knew that survival might demand sacrifices they were not yet prepared to make. The shadow shifted again, and this time Thunderhawk recognized the movement. "Hunters," he said quietly, a grim set to his jaw. "They have come for what they believe is hidden here. They will not leave until they find it." Winter Rose swallowed hard. Her pulse raced. She clutched his arm, feeling the strength and the warmth, and silently vowed to face whatever came together. The storm howled louder. The ridge above them groaned as if the mountain itself had taken a deep breath, and Thunderhawk and Winter Rose waited. Hearts beating in unison for the confrontation that would determine not only their survival, but the secrets buried deep in the frozen wilderness. The night stretched on, thick with tension, as the world outside held its judgment and the unknown pressed closer. Stoppable, unforgiving, and inevitable. The night deepened into a silence so heavy it pressed against their ears, broken only by the storm's angry gusts and the occasional groan of snow-laden rocks. Thunderhawk's senses were taut, every muscle coiled, every breath measured. Winter Rose pressed against him, their bodies pressed together not just for warmth but for courage. The mountain held secrets older than any man, older than the settlers who had crept into these lands, and Thunderhawk felt them all in the shifting snow and the wind that cut like a blade. The hunters. "They are close," he whispered, his voice almost drowned by the wind. "Closer than before. They are moving as one, careful, patient. They know the land is dangerous, but they do not care." Winter Rose's heart pounded in her chest. She had never felt so exposed, so dependent, yet so alive. Her eyes scanned the shadows just beyond their small shelter, where snow and darkness blended into a realm of unseen threats. "Can we fight them?" she asked, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. Thunderhawk shook his head slowly. "Not here, not in the open. If we try to fight now, the snow will bury us first. We must survive, hide, and wait for the right moment. Only then can we turn the danger back on them." They moved as one beneath the crude roof of pine branches, adjusting their position to keep as much warmth between them as possible. Thunderhawk's hands brushed her hair from her face, his touch gentle but deliberate, a silent reassurance. Every heartbeat between them felt amplified, a rhythm against the chaos outside. The storm raged, but within the fragile cocoon of their shelter, a different kind of fire burned, one of trust, of longing, of survival. Thunderhawk thought back to his father's lessons about the mountains. Every ridge, every hollow had its memory, its spirit. The land can protect those who respect it, he murmured to himself, though Winter Rose could hear. And tonight, it must protect us. Winter Rose listened, understanding that these were not mere words. This was strategy, instinct, and a deep connection to the world around them. She pressed closer to him, feeling his warmth seep into her frozen body, and for a moment, the storm seemed less threatening. But then a sharp crack rang out above them, louder than any before. The ground beneath their shelter quivered with sudden weight. Thunderhawk's eyes snapped open. "Move," he hissed. He grabbed Winter Rose and dragged her to the far side of the rock, their bodies low, hearts hammering. The snow above shifted violently, and for a terrifying second it seemed as if the entire ridge might collapse. The hunters, or whatever followed them, were no longer cautious. They were testing, probing, ready to strike. Winter Rose clutched his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. But there was no fear in her eyes, now only determination. She had survived hardships before, but this was a trial unlike any other. She realized that the bond between them, forged in the cold and danger, was more than warmth, it was strength. Together they were a force the storm could not extinguish. A shadow flickered across the snow outside their shelter, moving faster now, closer. Thunderhawk's instinct screamed at him to leap, to strike, to protect, but he forced himself to remain still. The snow around them could not be trusted. One false move and both of them could vanish beneath its weight. "Whatever they are after," he whispered to Winter Rose, "they will not find it tonight. We must wait, and then." His voice dropped, leaving the threat unspoken, but the tension in his eyes said it all. Winter Rose nodded, her fingers intertwined with his, their grip a silent promise. The warmth between them was more than physical now, it was resolve, courage, and a shared heartbeat against the wilderness. She realized she had never trusted anyone like this before, never depended on another so completely. And in that trust, she found clarity. Survival was no longer a matter of luck, it was a matter of unity. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the wind, deliberate and chilling. The hunters had found the faintest trace, or perhaps they were signaling to something beyond human eyes. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened. "They know we are here," he said. "We must move carefully, silently. Every step counts." Winter Rose's eyes widened, but she did not protest. Together, they shifted from their shelter, feeling the snow beneath their boots, listening to the storm and the subtle movements around them. The night seemed alive with threats, yet in that danger there was a pulse, a rhythm, a test of wills. They crept along the ridge, moving from shadow to shadow, snow crunching softly beneath their careful steps. Thunderhawk led, alert for every sound, every flicker of movement. Winter Rose followed, her trust complete, her body pressed to his back whenever the terrain forced them into tight passages or sharp inclines. The ridge opened to a narrow ledge overlooking a valley hidden by snow and darkness. Thunderhawk paused, scanning the horizon. In the distance, faint lights flickered, hunters making their way through the storm, unaware of the cliff they now approached. "We have a chance," he whispered. "We can use the ridge. We can turn their greed and ignorance against them." Winter Rose felt her heart race, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had lived for moments of danger before, but nothing had prepared her for the intensity of this night. She realized that the bond between them, the warmth and trust they shared, was now their most powerful weapon. Not fire, not weapons, not skill, but unity. Thunderhawk studied the hunters' faint shapes, calculating, predicting. The storm masked much, but it could not hide the intent etched into their movements. He whispered the plan, every word deliberate, and Winter Rose repeated silently to herself, memorizing each step. The night was a battlefield, yet it was also a crucible for the connection growing between them. Each shared glance, each touch of hand or shoulder reinforced the resolve burning inside them. Suddenly, a branch snapped somewhere behind them, and the hunters' attention shifted. Thunderhawk froze, listening, weighing their next move. Winter Rose held her breath, every nerve on edge. The moment stretched into eternity as the storm, the ridge, and the hunters held them in a tense balance, waiting for the first move that could change everything. Thunderhawk pressed his forehead to hers, their bodies close, sharing warmth, strength, and courage. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "we face it together. Nothing can break what we have found here. not snow, not hunters, not fear. Winter Rose nodded, feeling the depth of his promise, the weight of their connection. She realized that whatever awaited them, whatever danger or challenge, they would meet it side by side, hearts and hands intertwined. The snow shifted again, heavier this time, the storm pressing down like a living thing. The hunters were near, shadows moving with intent, and the cliff below waited as a silent witness to what was about to unfold. Thunderhawk adjusted their stance, readying for the moment when they would have to act, when instinct and courage would be tested beyond anything they had faced. Winter Rose pressed closer, feeling the fire between them, the pulse of life that defied the cold and the storm. The ridge trembled under the weight of the snow. The hunter's steps grew louder, and the night seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, every shift of wind, every heartbeat was amplified in the frozen silence. They were on the edge, teetering between survival and disaster, and the climax of their struggle loomed just beyond sight. Thunderhawk's eyes flicked to the horizon, then to Winter Rose. "Prepare yourself," he whispered. "The moment is almost upon us. We cannot falter. Not now. Not ever." Winter Rose nodded, tightening her hold on him, drawing strength from his presence. She could feel the storm pressing in, the hunters closing the gap, the cliff below waiting. Every instinct, every memory, every ounce of courage would be tested. The world had shrunk to this ridge this night, this heartbeat shared between two souls facing the impossible together. The wind roared, the snow shifted, and the shadows moved closer. Thunderhawk pressed a finger to his lips, signaling silence, and the anticipation stretched until it felt as if the world itself might snap, every muscle coiled, every nerve on edge. The storm, the hunters, and the mountain waited, and so did they. In the frozen darkness, with hearts racing and breaths shallow, Thunderhawk and Winter Rose faced the edge of fate. The tension was unbearable, the danger immediate, and the bond between them had never been stronger. And as the first shadow crossed the ledge, as the hunters stepped into the trap laid by the ridge in the snow, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment that would change everything. The first hunter's boots slipped on the edge of the ridge, sharp sound that cut through the storm like a gunshot. Thunderhawk's eyes narrowed, muscles tensing, but he did not move too soon. He had waited for this moment, every heartbeat in sync with Winter Rose's. The storm was their ally, masking their presence and confusing their pursuers. One misstep, and the hunter's greed would cost them dearly. Thunderhawk exhaled slowly, and with a single motion, he guided Winter Rose behind a jutting rock, shielding her from the eyes of those who sought to claim what they did not understand. The hunter stumbled again, each step misjudged in the blinding snow. Thunderhawk's careful observations allowed him to anticipate their movements. He whispered instructions to Winter Rose, keeping her calm, keeping her close. Her fingers intertwined with his, her trust and courage matching his own. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and it gave her a confidence she had never known. This was more than survival, it was the triumph of unity, of two souls joined by necessity, and now by something far deeper. One hunter reached for the ridge's edge, attempting to gain a better view, and Thunderhawk moved with precise timing. A small, deliberate shove sent the man tumbling into a snowbank far below, the fall breaking the spell of fear that had kept them tense. Winter Rose gasped softly, but there was no panic, only relief and a spark of exhilaration. Thunderhawk smiled briefly, the first expression that carried warmth beyond their struggle. "Stay close," he whispered. "We are not done yet." The remaining hunters were disoriented, unsure of the terrain, and now wary of the mountain's hidden tricks. Thunderhawk and Winter Rose moved with purpose, using the storm as cover. Every step, every careful shift of weight drew them closer to safety. It was not just the hunters they had to outwit, the mountain itself was alive with danger. Loose rocks threatened their footing, and snow drifted unpredictably, hiding pitfalls in fragile ice. But Thunderhawk had known these ridges since childhood. Every hollow, every slope was mapped in his memory, every step guided by instinct and respect for the land. Winter Rose followed, feeling her own courage grow with each moment. The fear that had gripped her hours ago now blended with exhilaration. She could see the strength in Thunderhawk, not just the physical power, but the depth of his mind and spirit. He had guided them through storms before, taught her to trust the earth beneath her feet, to read the wind and snow like a language. And in his eyes, She found not just protection, but something she had longed for, a partner who could share both danger and hope. The hunters were regrouping, shouting to each other through the wind, frustrated by their inability to track the pair through the blizzard. Thunderhawk and Winter Rose paused briefly behind a thick outcrop, listening to the distant echoes. It was clear now that the hunters were no longer moving. As one, they were disorganized, panicked, and unsure. The mountain had given them a chance. Thunderhawk looked at Winter Rose, and for the first time in the night their eyes met fully. Unguarded and understanding passed between them. "This is our moment," he said softly. "We must move quickly." They descended along a narrow ledge that curved around the mountainside, snow crunching softly underfoot, their bodies pressed together for warmth and balance. Winter Rose leaned into Thunderhawk, her trust complete, her fear replaced by determination. The wind roared around them, but it no longer held the same terror. The danger remained, but so did their unity. Every step reinforced the bond that had grown between them, a bond born of shared trials, shared warmth, and shared courage. Suddenly, a gust struck them from the side, nearly knocking Winter Rose off balance. Thunderhawk caught her instantly, his arms wrapping around her in a protective embrace. She looked up at him, the snow plastering strands of hair across her face, and for a moment the storm faded into the background. Her lips curved into a small, breathless smile. "I trust you," she whispered. Thunderhawk pressed his forehead to hers, feeling the heat of her body against his. "And I will never let you go," he replied, his voice steady, resolute. They shared a brief moment of intimacy, a spark of light in the storm, a reminder that life could be tender even in the harshest of winters. The hunters had stopped their pursuit at the top of the ridge, wary of the dangerous terrain and the unknown that seemed to protect the pair. Thunderhawk seized the opportunity, leading Winter Rose through a hidden path that curved around the mountain and descended toward a sheltered valley below. The snow thinned gradually, the wind easing slightly as they moved. Each step brought relief, but Thunderhawk remained vigilant. The frontier was full of surprises, and he knew not to let guard down until they reached safety. Finally, as dawn began to touch the horizon with pale light, they emerged into a small glade surrounded by thick pines. The snow here was softer, the wind less relentless. A frozen creek glimmered in the early light, and Thunderhawk allowed himself a rare exhale. They were safe for now. Winter Rose dropped to her knees, brushing snow from her clothing, her eyes shining with both exhaustion and awe. Thunderhawk knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "We made it," he said, though the words felt too small for the journey they had endured. "The mountain and the storm tried to claim us, but we have survived." Winter Rose looked up at him, her lips parting in a smile that was radiant, fearless. "We survived." Together, she replied. Their eyes met, and in that gaze was a promise, a recognition of the bond forged in snow, danger, and warmth. They spent the first light of morning tending to each other, sharing small pieces of food they had preserved, brushing the snow from one another, and speaking softly of what had happened. The bond between them had grown unshakable, strengthened not only by survival, but by the realization that they had found trust and love in the harshest conditions. Thunderhawk spoke of the mountain's history, the secrets hidden in its folds, and of the lessons the land had taught him about patience, respect, and courage. Winter Rose listened, absorbing every story, every lesson, and feeling herself part of something larger, something eternal. She realized that the frontier, with all its dangers and wonders, had given her a gift beyond survival. It had given her a partner, a protector, and a kindred spirit. As the sun rose higher, melting some of the snow and casting warm light over the valley, Thunderhawk and Winter Rose walked together, hands intertwined, hearts still racing but full of hope. The hunters were nowhere to be seen. The storm had begun to fade, and the mountains seemed to settle into quiet reverence. The world that had seemed so hostile now felt alive with possibility, and the two of them knew that this was not the end of their journey, but the beginning of a new chapter. Winter Rose looked at Thunderhawk, her eyes shining. "We faced death together," she said softly, "and we survived. I never imagined I could feel so alive." Thunderhawk smiled, a rare, gentle expression that lit his rugged features. "Life is strongest when we face it together," he replied. "God. The mountain, the storm, the hunters, they taught us that, and we will carry that lesson with us." They sat together by the creek, letting the first warmth of the sun touch their frozen faces, sharing quiet laughter and tender glances. The snow that had threatened to consume them now reflected the light around them, sparkling like a promise. In that glade, safe and alive, they discovered that love, courage, and trust were more powerful than any storm. As they prepared to leave the valley, the wind carried a faint whisper through the pines, almost as if the mountain itself acknowledged their survival. Thunderhawk and Winter Rose exchanged a glance, understanding without words that they had faced the impossible and emerged stronger. The frontier had tested them, the storm had challenged them, but together they had overcome. And as they walked hand in hand toward the distant horizon, the snow melting beneath their feet, the sun rising behind them, and the mountains standing silent witness, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them united, hearts intertwined and spirits unbroken. The journey had been perilous, the storm relentless, but love, trust, and courage had carried them through, and now the world seemed full of light, hope, and endless possibility. In the stillness after the storm, Thunderhawk held Winter Rose close, feeling her warmth, her heartbeat, and the unspoken promise between them. The trials they had endured had not only survived, they had been transformed. Snow, the hunters, and the mountain had tested their courage, but in the process, they had discovered that the greatest power lay not in the land or the storm, but in the bond they shared. And as they moved forward, leaving the valley behind, the horizon wide and golden before them, the story of Thunderhawk and Winter Rose became a testament to survival, love, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.